That's right. So we're not alone. That's a good start.
Yep.
I'll just give it a couple of minutes to, about
Yeah,
a minute or so
it
to
takes
fill
a
up.
while to populate, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
When we did the general introduction to exams, we had about 70 people, didn't we, from memory?
Yeah, I think that was over lunchtime as well.
Yes,
So,
yes,
yeah,
yes, yes, yes.
we'll see how we do, but we're already past the single figures. So that's good.
Good, 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 good. And we'll do Q&A at the end.
Well, I mean, sometimes if something feels like it's relevant, I'll try and butt in and do
Excellent.
it there.
You did that last time and it was perfect. Well done. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll have a little bit of it. I'm sure there'll be questions at the end.
Yeah.
I'll just give it another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll make a start.
Sure.
Okay, right, I think we're good. Right, okay, welcome everyone to the latest CPD from the Insurance Institute in Manchester. Today is a CPD that I like to almost run on an annual basis because I think professional qualifications are everything that the CII is about and something that we're particularly passionate about in Manchester. And today's speaker has been involved in that journey for quite a while. Phil and his company Insurance Training Partnership have supported the Institute and many of its members through qualifications through DIP and ACI and the fast track programs that we've done. But one thing I've noticed through the pandemic, and one thing that's been noticed in the numbers, is that there's an increasing number of people that are registering for their exams and perhaps have completed the cert. So I thought it would be a really good time to perhaps talk about the next level, because there certainly is a bit of a difference and a step up from cert into diploma and the qualifications that lie behind. So hopefully you'll all come away from this session with a good taster for that. There will be a follow-up workshop on one of the compulsory units next month. So if this has really piqued your interest, it'd be a great time to talk to your companies and get the resources ordered and so on. And then you can make the most of the revision day that will be available to members on a selected basis next month. Following the session, there'll be a usual feedback form that will come through. I want to hear, particularly from those that are in the either the early stages of their insurance career, what do you want to have more support on? What do you want more sessions on technical subjects and so on? So yeah, please make sure you fill that in and get back to us. But yeah, I'll hand it over to Phil. Phil, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. Morning, everybody. Okay, today we're going to talk about an introduction to diploma. Before we do that, so just to sort of position things, I thought I'd have some content that we can think about. And, if you've got questions when we get to the end, please stay with me and talk to me. It's important when we choose our pathway to professional qualifications to choose the right level of qualification. So I'm going to open up with a little bit of a conversation about the difference between certificate and diploma, because I think that's actually quite important. We may also perhaps just touch on, why do we bother with these qualifications when, many people will say they've been in the industry for 20 years and, they can still do the job without professional qualifications. So I'll try and touch on that for you. One of the big questions that people always have when they move from cert to diploma is, how long will it take me? And I'll try and give you a realistic approach to that. And you'll hear some stories from people who have taken the diploma, and the diploma's been around now for about 22 years in its current format, with coursework for about 9 years. But there's an awful lot of stories that people seem to tell about what happened to them. And I think the one point I'd want to make to you is, whatever they've told you about 5 years ago, it's not the same today. So we'll touch on the subjects involved in the diploma. We'll touch on how we do it, and I'll try and elaborate on how you should be spending your own study time. And most importantly, there's probably some resources out there that are freely available when you sign up to do a diploma subjects that people just do not use. That sort of Paul's introduced me very kindly by talking about, the support we've had for the Institute. Perhaps you want to know who I am and what I do. We've been working as a company for 20 years now, helping people through ACI diploma and certificate programs. We're still a small company, but we tend to reach about 1,500 people a year, and we work all over the UK and the Republic of Ireland. All right, why do people come to us, and what have we got to offer? Well, we get people through things with very high pass rates, and we tend to, and I think this is the big thing, save them about 60% of their sort of study time. All right, my history up until 2018, I'd worked for over 25 years as an examiner and an assessor for the CII. And what did that mean? It meant setting exam papers, it meant marking papers, and it meant doing lots of work around the development of the new exam structure. So I think I've got a background in it, not just from a tutoring point of view, but I can sort of show you how an examiner thinks as well. So let's kick off the morning by looking at, as I say, what the diploma is and where it fits in, who it's aimed at, how it's assessed, and I've got a funny title at the bottom, haven't I? What really matters to me. So perhaps as you're listening, if you have got some individual questions about how what I'm saying affects you, we can talk about that as we move through. All right then. There's 3 levels of qualification which the Chartered Insurance Institute offer, and many people don't understand the difference between a level 3, a level 4 and a level 6 qualification. The UK has got a qualifications framework, and certificate is badged as level 3, which means it's the equivalent of 2 A levels. The diploma is badged at level 4, and this is a strange interpretation. But when you've got your diploma, it's the equivalent of getting into university and passing through the first year, in other words, first year exams or first year coursework. So it sort of puts it ahead of the certificate itself. All right, just so you know where the advanced diploma sits and fits in, that's a level 6 qualification. And as a level 6 qualification, that's the same as a 2-1 honours degree. So what we're doing is when we move from certificate to diploma, if we look at the world of sort of schools and education, we're moving from A levels to university. Of course, in our world, it's really nothing like that. Professional exams are totally different to the way in which we work when we sort of were at school and in education. There's not the same level of 2-year commitment, for example, like to do 2 A levels. So let's just have a little look, and what I'm going to try and do is compare certificate to diploma. So initially, before I talk about the diploma in detail, some of you can see the difference between the two things, because one of the comments that we've had, I've just been running with my company a program for diploma for the Insurance Institute of Manchester with 12 people, is that every one of them said what a big difference it was moving from cert to dip. All right, certificates usually aimed as an entry-level qualification. And if you were to look at the CII website, it sort of gives the indication that certificate is for people who are in a support role, or it talks about people who might want to dip their toe in the water for qualifications. And it sort of pitches it's around 2 A levels. What I wanted to say to you today was that the feelings and the opinions I'm expressing are not coming from London, from CII. They're coming from myself, and they're coming from the sort of conversations I've been having with people over the years. And one of the first things that hit me when we had the diploma was people always think about starting with a certificate, even though possibly they've got a degree, even though they've got more than 2 A levels. So the one thing I want to sort of bring home to everyone is you can actually start with the diploma. You don't have to start with certificate. All right. It doesn't mean the certificate's a bad qualification. It gives us a way of entering professional qualifications with multiple choice online exams, and we've currently got 11 subjects to choose from. It's a really useful technical qualification. And, I'm going to put up a slide and I'm going to make some comments which I think are relevant to what we talked about when we make the difference move from certificate to diploma. Textbooks for certificates, most of them are just over 100 pages. I think we've still got IF2 stretching to about 200 pages. Very factual. Textbooks are more certificate level, are more like manuals, not particularly user-friendly, very technical though. And of course, you've got the option to have a textbook or to go online. It's interesting to see that an awful lot of the people we work with still prefer the paper version of the textbook rather than the online version. All right, the benefit of the online version, of course, is the search facility. And whether you're using your studies at certificate or at diploma level, that's one of the tools that I think people are underusing and not using to its fullest capability, to be able to search for a topic that you need to find more information about. And we're going to come on to that because very shortly when we talk diploma, we're going to be talking about coursework, and it's really helpful to have a tool that helps you find things in the textbook. All right, with certificate, what's different is it's based purely and simply on a multiple choice examination. And that multiple choice examination is really a memory test. And I think the one thing that, I'd say to people with certificate is if you practice enough questions, you will get an insight as to how to pass the online examination. Certificate, that's not a bad thing, but I don't know, when you're learning something, if you learn something by rote, in other words, you've got 4 alternative answers and one of them's correct. If you learn something by rote and just learn the correct answer, I sometimes question whether you understand the topic. And one of the differences, I think, between certificate and diploma is the level of understanding. And where a certificate presents facts to you, the diploma does it in a more detailed way, and the diploma gives you an understanding of the topic that you're actually studying. All right, if you're doing your certificate, you'll have come across, I hope anyway, something called Revision Mate. Revision Mate's an online tool, and at the end of a chapter, it offers you the opportunity to practice multiple choice questions. And very many people have probably used this tool when they've done their cert. What I'd like to point out is that Revision Mate is also available for the diploma, and it's a very good way of preparing, initially anyway, for a knowledge test to see whether you've understood the chapter, but it's also a way of preparing for a multiple choice examination, which you'll have to do when you reach diploma. All right, if I was talking to you about the certificate, I would have had a conversation about your background, how much experience you've got in the industry, and the academic level of qualifications. I'd have also had a conversation with you about your level of motivation and what you want to achieve over the next, and I always sort of talk about the next 3 years. If certificate is what you want to achieve, there's no barrier. That's where you'd go. But I would actually question if you'd got a couple of hours a week, whether certificate is the right place. And possibly that journey could have actually started by starting to talk about the diploma itself. So don't want to be controversial. Certificate is a very useful qualification. And if you've got it, you're going to find it in a moment. It helps you get the diploma. But, sometimes we stand to one side, and because it almost appears like the pyramid says you start at the bottom with cert, people don't even think of moving on to the diploma until they've qualified. But you can take the diploma at any stage. So let's start to talk about the diploma, and let's try and give you the insight as to probably what you want to hear. As I say, we're going to look at how you can benefit from the diploma, who looks to take it, and I think the bit about repeating what I said earlier, how long it takes to succeed. There's some really odd stats out there, and some of them are not easily available. But when people start their diploma journey, a lot of them take more than 5 years to achieve their diploma. And, if someone said to me that I was going to start doing a professional qualification today and I'd qualify in 5 years' time, one of the barriers would be that's too long. So I'm going to try and talk to you a little bit about how much time that you need to spend in your own time, and effectively how you can probably achieve the diploma in less than 3 years. And with certain schemes, you can do it in less than 2. Is it exam based or is it coursework driven? Well, let's find out. Here we go. I'm looking top left of the screen. And one of the things that you'll hear from people who've done their diploma in the past is about the subjects that they took and the experience that they basically went through. If you were looking at the diploma prior to 2014, it was examination based. So people would have taken a written 3-hour exam either in April or October, and they would have passed or failed based on that examination. Examinations are a memory test, and some people are very anti-examinations, some people are still very pro-exams. But the point I want to make to you today is that there are no written exams. So if you're one of these people that has a phobia about having to sort of go into a room and sit down for 3 hours, that's the sort of story you inherit from people who did the diploma in the past. Please take that away. There are no written exams. The diploma is coursework based, and it will, at the end of each subject, it will actually have a multiple choice online examination. Now, we'll talk a little bit about the timescales of how long it takes to do these things. We'll talk about the actual subjects involved. But let me just say at this point in time, the multiple choice examination is now available for you to take, not by going to a centre, which is what we would have done before COVID, but one of the biggest advantages we've got now is you can take it online. So some companies have got a special office where CI where the company allow the staff to go and take an examination. If not, you can actually take it from home, and I think this removes an awful lot of pressure from people. People still have this phobia about having to go to a centre to take even a multiple choice exam. Multiple choice exams are 1-hour exams, and I'm going to come to that towards the end. But the written exams were 3 hours. So a positive, you can take the multiple choice examination from any location in the UK, in fact, any location in the world. And more importantly, it's a 1-hour paper. All right. Our way when we looking at diploma is that it's something that is probably accessible for anybody who has left school with a minimum qualification of A levels. And the point that I wanted to make is certificate is not a prerequisite. However, if you start with certificate, you'll find that some of those points will count towards the big picture of gaining your diploma. So let's just have a look at what we're going to look at, and let's just look at who it's aimed at. The difference between certificate in terms of your day job, it's going to develop you in your role. In other words, rather than just give you an awareness about the industry, if you work in a more technical role like an underwriter, if you effectively are working in claims and you have a technical role, or if you're a first line manager, and that could be in a call center, claims department, it could be in sales, you might want to aspire to diploma. And one of the things that I think you should be thinking about is, and I said I'd try and sort of say where the diploma fits in. Where do you see your career being in 3 years' time? If you're happy with the job that you have and you've got your cert, it's a way of career development. And I suppose what we should be asking ourselves is, where do future employers see these qualifications? And they are an important part of our industry. There's no requirement to take them. They're voluntary, but as Paul said, we're seeing an increasing number of people take these qualifications. So, they should help you get jobs. But, the point is, it's a big step up from certificate. So let's talk about things like time periods. Let's talk about, how much in terms of number of hours you need to spend. I would suggest a minimum, if you're doing a diploma subject over a 6-month period, is an average of about 3 hours a week. Now, these are generic figures, and if you were to read the CII website, it talks about diploma subjects taking between 100 and 120 hours. And of course, if you can do the maths, 26 weeks times 3 doesn't equal that. Personal view is I think that you can tailor your experience to some of the subjects, so you'll spend less time on them. So when we talk about the subjects themselves, which is where I'm going next, some of the things that I want you to be aware of is that you may actually be working in a technical discipline, in other words, your job, where there is a subject that it doesn't quite mirror it, but it has a very close association. And that's one of the ways to enter the diploma. Pick a subject with which you may be familiar because of your job or past experience. Don't just go to a list of subjects and pick a title. Pick a subject that may have some relevance to your actual job itself. So let's have a look and let's sort of see what we've got on offer. The diploma requires you to take 2 subjects at what I would call technical level, plus 2 compulsory subjects. All right, we mentioned the word compulsory and straight away people freeze. It's a requirement that you take 2 subjects which are compulsory, and as you'll see shortly, one of them is law and the other one is business. The technical subjects, there are a number of them. Some of them will have titles that may look attractive, but sometimes the title doesn't give things away. So I'm going to talk about what to look for when you're choosing your subjects at the moment. But before we do, I just want to talk about points and the number of points you need to achieve certain qualifications. To achieve your diploma, you need to achieve 120 points. How is that made up? The 2 compulsory subjects, law and business, are worth 25 points each. The 2, all right, they're called elective subjects when you actually look on the website, I think you'll find. But the choice subjects, you can either choose choice subjects at 20 or 25 points. So effectively, many people will choose 2 subjects at 20 points, and I'll talk about those subjects in a moment. So, the maths is getting a bit more difficult, but 2 compulsories at 25 are 50, 2 electives, as you can see, at 20 points are 40, so that's 90 points. Okay, 30 of the points that you will take forward from your certificate help you qualify for your diploma. So I didn't say don't do the certificate, but what I sort of said was it's not a requirement that you'll take the certificate before the diploma. And one of the things I will talk to you about is working smart. There are certificate subjects and diploma subjects which effectively cover the same syllabus areas. So one of the tactics that you might want to employ if you haven't started your certificate is to take the subject at certificate level, which mirrors the subject at diploma level. In other words, you'll still take 2 multiple choice exams and you'll do coursework, but you'll be covering the same subject area at the same time. I just think this is the most efficient way of sort of taking the diploma rather than going on a journey to do certificate and then maybe come back to do a subject which maybe you picked up when you did your certificate maybe 1 or 2 years ago. So one of the tips from today is work smart. And when you're choosing your subjects, if you haven't started your cert route, pick 2 certificate subjects that mirror diploma and do them in the same time period. In other words, it's not a prerequisite that you need your certificate to do the diploma first. All right, we're going to talk a little bit now about the subjects and about the way in which the examination and the coursework system works. And again, is it complex? Probably after you've done the first or second subject, it's really straightforward. But the most important thing is when you're starting off, unless there's someone to help you through it, many people, and again, we start many programs every year, struggle to actually see the best and most efficient way of working. So let's start by choosing our subject, shall we? Okay, when we go to the box at the top right-hand corner, you'll see a list of some of the subjects. These are not all of the subjects, but these are some of the elective subjects. And I'll try and give some guidance here. You've got two very generic subjects, M80, underwriting, and M85, claims. Okay, if you work as an underwriter, the underwriting subject is perfect. If you work in claims, the claims subject is perfect. But the diploma isn't devised to give you an area in which you work where meaning the CI will produce a subject that will match your job exactly. And so what I would sort of say to you is, if you work in a particular role that says claims or underwriting, those are subjects you really should consider. They're both 20-point subjects, and I'm going to talk about 20 and 25-point subjects in terms of the difference. But it's really simple to understand. Much smaller books, lesser syllabus content, and quite, when I say generic, they're not specific to a particular subject area like liability or cyber or property or BI. They don't do policy cover. They talk about general principle. And I think this, when somebody is starting their career or where somebody is moving into a new subject area, is probably more beneficial than going into policy detail. Some of the other subjects which I'll mention, they actually do talk about the policy wording. So you need to understand what's covered, what's not covered. You need to understand how the market operates. And when you don't work in a technical market, just to pick a subject to say, I think I might be interested, is actually the wrong thing to do, in my opinion. A little story. Many years ago, and we're going back probably about 10 years, there was a big increase in the number of people taking the aviation paper, and this was when we had written exams. Now, the aviation paper is designed for people who work in that industry, and it's designed for people who work in aviation insurance. The numbers suddenly increased dramatically, and the only interpretation was that the statistics were showing that the pass rates were quite high. And of course, when people from outside of the industry started to take the paper, the pass rates decimated. So one of the things I would sort of say to you is, try and look for things which are relevant to your job, or if not, try and look at the generic subjects like M80 and M85. There are other subjects that are very specific to the area which people work. M93 property, well, it does what it says on the tin. It talks about property insurance. All right, what it doesn't quite say on the tin is it also does business interruption. But if you're working in commercial or SME, want to develop your skills, that's a brilliant subject to work towards. Of course, it comes with hard work. It's a 25-point subject. And when I talk about, how long it takes to study something, when you get into books with 25 points, that's where the 3 hours a week comes in as a minimum. All right, you've got to think, what does that mean to me in my life? It means half an hour a day for 6 days a week, or it means giving up a Saturday morning. You've got to think it through. And one of the areas that I think is important when you are choosing to start this diploma journey is that with certificate, a lot of people have got a habit of just reading the textbook towards the date of an examination, cramming. Cramming means not really understanding, but being able to answer the questions in my world. With diploma, we can't do this because we've got to do coursework. All right, the other subjects which I've sort of noted in the bubble of elective subjects, if you work in personal lines, there's an excellent subject which is M86, household insurance. And again, it does what it says on the package. It talks about the needs of a private household, of buildings, contents, all risks. It talks about gadget insurance, and it talks about the insurances of things like travel, and it will talk about things like extended warranty and all of those other things that if you work in personal lines, you might know about. And it's very, very useful if you've got that personal lines background, because you'll associate with most of it, just like you will with property if you have a property background. The motor paper M94 is a bit more misleading in my opinion, and I stress these are my opinions, but it doesn't quite do what it says on the tin. An awful lot of people who work in personal lines motor pick the motor subject, but it's got a lot of commercial motor in it. It's got a lot of motor claims in it, and it's got a fair amount of legislation in it about the Road Traffic Act. And when they pick up the motor book and it's not what they like, they spend far more than the 3 hours per week working at it. They'll probably struggle. The coursework they'll find hard, and they may not understand what the book is telling them, so they have to do lots of extracurricular studies. And I can't go through every subject and give an opinion. I wouldn't dream of doing that. But try and not just look at the title of the subject. The first thing that you should do before you select to choose a subject to do is to actually look specifically at the syllabus, which is online on the CII website. And more importantly, you'll see that there are some things called learning outcomes. They break the syllabus down and it tells you exactly what the topic covers in great detail. And this is one of the failings. People don't do this. They just pick a subject because someone told them it was interesting. They pick a subject because the words, like I've tried to illustrate, motor insurance, seem to be what they do, but they don't fully understand what's involved. So please look at the syllabus online, look at the learning outcomes. Okay, we're talking about elective subjects, and I've commented on four or five. I want to turn now to the two compulsory subjects, business and law. First thing is, you will probably hear a variety of people telling you about how difficult law was or how impossible the business subject was. These are their words, not mine. The first thing is they're both 25-point subjects. They're much bigger textbooks, and they require possibly a little bit of reading outside of the textbook. Please don't get misled by people who've done law in the past. 50%, almost 50% of what we do in law is what we do in insurance when we practice our job. In other words, we talk about things like who can insure things, insurable interest. We talk about the duty of disclosure. In other words, we talk about what needs to be disclosed and why. We actually talk about indemnity. In other words, how claims get paid. And we also talk about things like subrogation, recovery, and we talk about contribution where there's more than one insurer. These are insurance principles. And if people would just get their head around this and start to use the tools that CI provides before they actually begin the subject, they would find a subject like law, A, first of all, much more interesting, and B, much more attainable. And here I'm going to come to things like textbooks. Now, whether you've got the online textbook or the printed textbook, whether it's law or business, it's pretty meaty. There's lots to read. And the first thing that you should do when you are looking at a textbook, when you're starting your subject, is to look, and it's usually in the first 9 pages, there's a table that says syllabus and learning outcomes. And in that table, it gives you a number against each learning outcome. And this is really important. The number will indicate how many questions there will be in the multiple choice examination. And effectively, there are 50 questions in the multiple choice exam. The number that reflects the number of questions does not automatically reflect the importance of the chapters. What am I trying to say? The biggest chapters do not always give you the largest number of questions to read. So typically in law, the first 60 pages about how the legal system works, about how the court system works, about how law is made, and about how tort, that's negligence, nuisance, strict liability works. There's 60 pages in the book. There's a huge amount, and yet they only give you, I think, 9 questions. And yet when we turn to subrogation and contribution, there are 6 questions and probably about 12 pages. So one of the tips when you're starting your diploma, once you've chosen your subject, is to look specifically at the start of the book, look at the learning outcomes, and see which chapters are important. And this will help you when you're preparing for the multiple choice, decide where to spend your time. Okay, enough on subject choice and insight into the subjects. And let's talk a little bit about coursework. Every subject, doesn't matter whether it's a compulsory subject like law or a subject like underwriting, comes with coursework, and the format will always be the same. The coursework has to be done within a 6 months deadline. The deadline starts, or I should say the clock starts ticking as soon as you enroll. So again, think carefully about this when you're choosing to go into diploma. If you know that specifically you are going to be extremely busy over the next 3 months, work related, family related, illness related, whatever is taking you away from doing your studies, do not enroll for the subject because the clock starts to tick immediately. The coursework will consist of 10 questions, and what we'll see is that we've got a 6 months deadline. You can extend the deadline, and through COVID, CII have been incredibly generous. They have worked with people and they have extended deadlines. In non-COVID conditions, you can extend a deadline, but you have to pay a penalty, a monetary penalty. And I'd often question whether people want to pay a significant amount of money on top of what it costs to enter a subject. So when you're thinking about your diploma, think carefully about when you're going to start it, and think about what you're doing over the course of the next 6 months. Okay. We've also got 2 deadlines. When you enter a subject, you've got a 6 months coursework deadline, and then you've got a deadline of 18 months from the date of entry for the multiple choice examination. And, this is where, in my opinion, things start to go wrong. Instead of working conscientiously on the coursework over not just the last 6 weeks, but over a course of 6 months, and I'll talk about that in a moment, a lot of people get into a false sense of security. In other words, well, I've signed up, that's the big step. I'll open the book one day, and perhaps a month later they do, and then perhaps they go on holiday, and then 2 or 3 months pass, and with 3 months to go and 12 weeks, I'll do the coursework now. Panic sets in. The coursework requires probably about 60 or 70 hours of work. You're looking to find answers to questions that you've never seen before, and sometimes may not really understand how to interpret. All right, this is the secret. Please don't even look at the questions till you have actually read the subject topic. It makes no sense at all. And what happens is people panic and they work hard for probably 8 of those 12 weeks, and they'll submit the coursework. I'll talk about how long it takes for the coursework to be marked and how it's marked, but it's common to get a delay of anything from 2 weeks to 6 weeks. And then they'll think when the coursework comes back, well, I've had a rest, I'll think about the multiple choice exam. And of course, they've still got a deadline of 12 months beyond that 6 months when the coursework expired. And probably somewhere between 6 and 12 months in that period, in other words, after the coursework, they'll enter for the multiple choice exam. Stop and think what you're doing. You've learned everything that you needed to do to pass the coursework, assuming you passed. You're probably at your peak when you've sent the coursework in. If you were to then just take it a little bit further and to go back to those learning outcomes and to effectively start to go through those learning outcomes and prepare for the multiple choice exam, and my advice to you would be do that multiple choice exam within about 8 weeks maximum, 3 weeks better, of sending in your coursework. You will enhance your chances greatly of passing. Work smart by keeping the deadlines close together. So, what have we learned about the coursework? Well, let's do a little bit of detail on it. The coursework can be demanding, and the question is, how much shall I write? What level of detail will I go into? I'll try and cover some of that. There are no black and white answers to some of these questions because we're all different. What I can tell you is that you need a monthly plan. You'll find out there are 10 questions, and you'll find out there is a mixture of effectively 10 point, 20 point, and 30 point questions. Okay, if it's a 10-point question, this is rough rule of thumb. You'll probably find the answer to that question in a chapter under a topic heading, and all you have to do is to extract the information, apply it to the question, and put it into your own words. 10-point questions probably are going to take you a couple of hours, having done the pre-preparation, the reading, in other words, understanding the subject matter, and by the time you've written it up and you're happy with it, I would have said in your own time, probably 2 hours. If you do it in 30 minutes, I'm very pleased for you. But just ask yourself the question, have I actually done what the topic is asking me to do? I'll talk a little bit about the words that we use in the questions. And more importantly, have I written enough? Okay, one of the questions that all the groups seem to ask me and people like me is, how much should I write? The CII gives guidance. It doesn't tell you what to do, and nobody can, because we all express ourselves differently. It does suggest that the maximum number of words to write is 10,000. And, the first thing is, as soon as people see that figure, they think, right, I've got to write 10,000 words. It doesn't say that. It sort of suggests that's the maximum you should write. And a lot of people will look at the coursework and they will write not about the question. They'll just write about the topic. They'll do an introduction. They'll put different elements of in law, case law that's not relevant. They'll do lots of additional reading as well, because there are things that in the textbook you can read in addition to the textbook. But my point is, when you're doing your coursework, is it relevant? 20-point subjects are a little bit more demanding. And I'm coming back to what I said about the learning outcomes. The learning outcomes are meaning a topic. And what usually happens is when we get a 10-point question, it's one learning outcome. When we get a 20 and a 30-point question, we tend to get the use of, in 20-point questions, definitely 2 outcomes. And in 30-point questions, we normally get 3 outcomes. But the way some of the questions have been worded in coursework, there's sometimes a 4th outcome as well. And 30-point questions are incredibly demanding, because unless you've actually taken in the whole of the syllabus, or unless you've actually understood what the question is requiring you to do by reading across the syllabus, but rather than taking it all in, when you start to undertake a 30-point question, you probably won't go into enough detail. Now, I'll try and explain a little bit about what some of these words mean before we finish. But you're going to see words like illustrate, define. No, you don't see define. They never ask for a definition. Doesn't mean you can't explain what something is. But the point about it is, we normally want you to explain why things are the way they are. So very often we'll talk about explain something, illustrate something. These words require us to write more than briefly outline. And I think people are still not doing this correctly. They look at the coursework, they see briefly outlined, they don't read that, they just look at the topic, and if they like the topic, they write lots. Coursework isn't asking you to do that. It's asking you to deal with the actual level of the actual question itself. Okay, if I think about what I've got to do, I literally have 6 months and I've got to do 10 questions. The questions are all of different value. And what I've tried to illustrate is that 30-point questions require more detail. And people will say, how many words? The answer to that is, I can't be precise. But, I would suggest if you're not writing 600 words on a 30-point question, you may write 800 words. You're probably not answering it correctly. But the secret to 20 and 30-point questions is reading across the syllabus before you attempt them. Okay, how does the marking process work? The first thing is you've got to attain a pass mark of 60%. 60% is the minimum. All right, when I sort of talk to people, I try and get them to aim at 70. In other words, not cut too many corners, and that gives them a little bit of headway. The coursework is marked twice by two independent people, and the first person doesn't know what the mark is of the second person. It's a very fair system, and if the marks are more than 10% apart, as a rough guide, what will happen is it'll be referred to a third person to adjudicate. So the marking process is quite long, and the actual marking process can take up to 40 days. If you borderline pass or borderline fail, it's not just marked by a third person who's the senior examiner, but it actually goes to a committee to consider whether it's a pass or fail. So it doesn't automatically mean the longer it takes to get the coursework back, there was a problem. There are other things like people can be ill, or perhaps those meetings can't be held as frequently as they might have been pre-COVID. But the idea is that there is a fair system of marking. And as I say, when you do receive your mark, I can guarantee you it's been marked at least twice. And if it's taken that extra bit of time, it may have been marked even a third time, or even gone before a committee. So it's a long process. In terms of what we're doing with questions, and I'm going to come back to this now, I'd like to look at the left-hand side where I've got a rather large circle. The questions that require you to discuss, to explain, and very often analyze, and to make a point, the question writers put in words like explain with justification. The idea is that you've got to pull in information to not just say, I think the answer is, but you've actually got to explain why you think the answer is. And you've got to evidence it, or with law, with case law. If we're talking about a technical paper, you've got to evidence it with policy cover. But these words, discuss, explain, analyze, and do things with justification, these are where you should be writing probably more than 400 words. And you might, on a 30-point question, be writing up to 600, 700, or even 800 words. So those are some of the words that indicate the question is more complex. Words like identify, state, briefly explain, they're looking for much shorter answers, probably around a maximum of 200 words, even less than that. But it's not a list, and this is the point again I want to make to everybody. When we're asking you to do things like briefly explain, it's not just list 6 short points. You still have to put some narrative there. When we do, and I've not mentioned the business subject yet deliberately, when we do the business subject, this will be one of the first times that you'll be asked to use numbers. The business subject contains some stuff around accounts and ratio analysis. Whenever we look at the M92 paper, there are normally 3 questions involving numbers, and straight away panic will set in. Why do I say that? Very few people enjoy doing mathematics or arithmetic. And when it comes to ratio analysis, which is a little bit more than simple multiplying of numbers, it's about understanding the numbers. You are actually in these sort of questions asked to show your workings. All right, how do I explain this to people? Very often, the ratio leads to an answer, and I'm just talking randomly. The answer is 7. For putting down the answer is 7, you get 1 mark. But very often the question says, analyze these figures and show your workings, and people just lose marks by not doing that. The majority of the marks for multiple choice, for mathematical questions are for showing the workings, putting down the steps that you went through to get to your answer, and then applying the answer to the question. So please be aware where you've got to do mathematics, showing working is important. All right, the other question I'd ask you to look for is something that talks about recommending something with reasons. It's not a list. In other words, if you're going to suggest the answer is derived from an area of a textbook, an area of policy cover, an area of reinsurance, whatever it could be, please explain why you're saying that the answer has to be done in a certain way. I've tried to explain then that the coursework takes a certain amount of time to prepare. And I think, spreading over a 6 month period, you should set yourself a minimum of 3 hours per week. Okay, where does it take us? Well, it takes us now to the multiple choice paper. Straight away, the statistics tell us that people don't pass the multiple choice paper first time. You can look on the CI website, and please don't ask me where it is because the website's changed rather a lot, changes every year. But with a little bit of studying, you will find a list of subjects, and it will give you an indication of the number of people that pass the coursework by subject. And you'll find that you can eventually look at the number of people that pass the multiple choice examination with pass rates. Pass rates do vary by subject, and when we get to things like the law paper, that's compulsory, remember, and the business paper, that's compulsory. It's not unusual to hear stories that people take the multiple choice paper 3 or even 4 times before they pass, and I find that a little bit scary. So, who benefits from retakes? From spending however much it is for each examination, more than £100. The only people I can see benefiting from this is the professional body. You don't benefit from it. So, let's try and think what you could actually do to improve your chances of passing the actual multiple choice examination. Because, as I said, poor preparation leads to these retakes. First thing is to realise that some of these examination papers are different to what you would have expected from certificate. And the first thing to do when you're preparing for multiple choice is to go onto the website. And again, I find this horrifying, but I would say probably more than half the people I talk to don't realise that there are actually 2 mock papers online. There's definitely one, and there's usually 2. And the reason for looking at the mock paper is that it shows you the actual format. Certificate papers, formats do vary in terms of number of questions, but the questions always feel the same. In other words, there are 4 options, 2 of them are wrong if you know what you're doing. One's right most of the time and one's right some of the time. So in other words, it's a choice of 1 out of 4. The law paper, very different. 40 questions, bit like certificate with 4 possible answers. And then when you get to the last 10 questions, the questions have got multiple answers, 4, 5 or 6, and sometimes, well, 2, 3 or 4 of them are right. And people get to the law paper the first time, they won't actually realise that, and it's going to throw them dramatically. When you get to the business paper, the first 25 questions, just like certificate. And then when you look at the next 25 questions, there are 5 case studies, and you have to read them. And then there are 5 questions on the case study. So the first thing that happens is, if you haven't prepared for this, you're going to be thrown. So it's not surprising that most people fail those papers at least once. All right, why do they fail a second time? It's because the panic sets in, and all they think that they have to do, it's just like certificate. It's not, by the way. All you have to do is read the book and get more detail. Use the learning outcomes at the start of the chapter to find out what's important, and then decide to spend how much time on those topics depending on which questions are more likely to come up. It's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. It's like saying, we've got to go on a journey from Manchester to Birmingham. You can either go on the journey without a map, or you could go with a map. And if you wanted to do it smartly, go with a navigation system. And that's what the CI tries to do. They try to give you that navigation system to sort of help you along the way. As I've said, there are usually 50 questions, and you've got to do it in an hour. And my question is, what does that tell you? Well, one thing it tells me is that I just get about 1 minute and 10 seconds on every question. And again, one of the reasons why people struggle with this is the fact that they do not spend the right amount of time on each question. They look at a question, they don't actually know what the answer is, but they spend sort of 2 minutes trying to evaluate what the answer is. Work smart. Do the questions that you can do as quickly as possible. And the questions that you can't do, these are the ones where you're probably not going to get them right. Come back to them at the end. In other words, don't run out of time and find that there are maybe in the last 10 questions things that you can't do. Okay, pass mark in the exam is not 60 but 70%. But be cautious on the day. The mark that you get on the day has to be verified. You receive an email from the CII, usually within a week, but hopefully within 3 days, confirming what your mark is. Sometimes the questions, after they have been submitted, the answers are re-evaluated. And when I say the answers are re-evaluated, what that means is that we get to the point where certain of the questions, maybe they've been misleading, the statistics indicate that, and so the questions are discounted. So sometimes, you may feel on the day you borderline passed, but we've had a number of people over the years that have then found that they haven't. So this, is what I'm saying to you. The pass mark is, 70%. Try and aim at that figure, and you'll definitely pass your multiple choice. All right, I'm getting towards the end of what I want to talk about, and what I would like to talk to you about now is, what other things do you need to think about when you're doing your diploma? The first thing is, can you actually get any help from people elsewhere? And it's useful when you've got someone in the office who has done a subject before, similar to the one you were doing, if not the same, just to talk about what they did to prepare, just to talk about what they found difficult. If they're in the office doing the same job to you, whatever they found difficult probably is the same sort of thing as you will find difficult. So, try and get some help from within the office. The other things that I think you might want to look at, top right, have you got previous qualifications that will lead to exemptions? CI is very generous, and if you've covered 70% of a particular topic and you have a degree, if you've covered 70% of the syllabus, you are likely to get an exemption. So common exemptions, obviously law degrees equal law, anything vaguely connected to do with business studies, business management, even sports science can help you get an exemption from the business subject. And, don't lose sight of the fact that, there are some quite generic degrees out there in accounting and things like that. They may not give you an exact subject exemption, but what they will do is they will give you some points. All right, final comment really sort of coming from me on something like this. Your employer might have a learning and development scheme which is accredited, so you may get some benefits from that by taking certain modules. Many of the large insurance companies now will actually have that available. And the final thing that I'd sort of talk about in terms of help is, can you benefit from possibly taking an apprenticeship? Again, it's not one of the things that I get involved with, but many people now are on pathways to do apprenticeships, and those apprenticeships can lead to certificate, diploma, and advanced diploma. So just explore that. All right, I'm going to finish by just talking about, if you want some help from ITP. We run courses all over the UK. We do face-to-face, and we run online workshops. Our pass rates are pretty outstanding. We get 98% of everybody through everything, and I can guarantee you that we would reduce study time by about 60%. Now, if you want to get in touch, you'll have a copy of the presentation anyway. I've put my phone number, and we've got a website just to verify. You can see what we do, and you can see some of the comments on there from people. But I hope you've enjoyed what I've been talking about, and I know it's a bit one-sided when I've got to get all this information conveyed in an hour, but if you'd like to ask any questions, I'm about to pause and I'll take any questions. So Paul, has anything come through?
Yeah, there was. I've waited to see if it covered off in the presentation.
Yeah.
Couple of couple of quite specific ones, really. There's one about prior learning, which I think you kind of glossed over a little bit, but there's it would usually they would tell you if you're exempt from compulsory examinations, wouldn't they? And
Yes,
then
yes, yes.
you're then left with however many marks you need to accrue.
Yes. Can I just come in there? I will say a few words. What the CII has done is built up a database of qualifications at different colleges, universities, professional bodies, and if you make a telephone call, and you wouldn't be the first person to have studied law at Birmingham, as an example. They won't tell you that you are exempt. They'll tell you you probably are exempt. Now you will have to then go through a process of submitting things like certificates to gain your exemption. It's not particularly quick, so don't expect instant results. But from the database, the CI can give you an insight pretty quickly. And I don't know if you know that or not, Paul, but they'll tell you almost on the phone instantly whether they think you're exempt or not. So, that phone call can make all the difference. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to do that. My degree wasn't really relevant.
No, no, indeed, indeed.
But yeah, certainly there's a few people, and a particular one that's on a graduate apprenticeship. There's been quite a tight time frame put on achieving ACII.
Yep.
So to do Cert Dip and ACII within a couple of years, that feels quite a push, doesn't it?
I think that's incredibly challenging. We've been around for all of these years and we've tried different angles and different ways. I would say that even with workshop help and support through an apprenticeship or, whichever model you choose, diploma, spending 3 hours a week is going to take you 2 years. And I think ACI is, again, another 2-year achievement. And I know there are claims that we can do it more quickly. In fact, we've tried to do it more quickly with people. We've run 18-month programs, and the problem that is facing people is if you've got 12 people doing it, most of them can't keep up. In other words, that number of hours that you have to dedicate every week, it's an average. And if you miss 2 of those weeks, 6 hours has been missed. That means 9 hours in week 3, and people start to fall behind. And once you fall behind, you miss your deadline. So I think those deadlines are very tight. Yes, Paul.
Yeah, I think it particularly probably comes down to that individual, doesn't it, and how disciplined and how they can be with
Yep.
timescales.
Yep.
There's another question from Hannah here that says, just the coursework for one subject needs to be done the same calendar year. 6 months to complete. Does that mean she has to wait until January? It doesn't reset.
No.
So
no, it's just a question of 6 months from whenever you enroll. So we don't have to worry about calendar years anymore.
And you could submit them as soon as you're ready. You don't have to wait
Yes.
until the end. As soon as you're ready to submit. Yeah.
No, and I think the important thing there, everybody, is, I'd encourage you to move fast. In other words, I gave the example of the people that, I've been familiar with over the years. Everything's left to the last minute. If you can start, all right, you can't start the coursework from day one because you need to read things, but somewhere after that first month, you can start to do questions. Yes, do them early.
It's also worthwhile as well, I suppose, if you're on an apprenticeship and your sights are firmly set on the advanced diploma, that you choose your units selectively and you kind of already choose your pathway with ACI in mind.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks, Phil. I think that's everything in terms of one more.
Okay, go ahead.
Always that way. Insurance is broken down to 3 main categories. You'd say broking, claims, and underwriting. Of course, actually risk management too. But from a claims point of view, is there any particular field of insurance that might be good to build a career in that is seeing a demand?
Oh, that's a really hard question, isn't it?
Yeah,
and one that I would not even dream to answer.
No, it's not really exams, is it?
No, and
career advice.
And it's career advice, and of course, nobody can actually give exact advice on something because the market's fluid, isn't it? It's changing, and I think with the working from home and sort of like split working, I think things will change again. It's a very difficult area to go into. All I would say to that person that asked that question is, talk to as many people as possible, get as many opinions as possible. Don't make a rush judgment. And keep your options open by doing professional qualifications. If I could just say one final thing on that, Paul. Once somebody's got a diploma or an advanced diploma, it gives them a superb insight into the marketplace. And employers don't look necessarily at what you've learned in property insurance. They just look at what you're capable of doing. And these qualifications are an indication of that.
And there was one more question come through around the apprenticeship route, and I can kind of answer that one because I'm on a level 6 apprenticeship myself.
Yep.
So yeah, it is. I'd say it's still worth it. It puts a framework around your timescale structure, and also helps you potentially pay for it as well.
Yes.
So I'd say an apprenticeship's always worth it because it gives you wider support, and I think the more support you have, the more chance you have of passing. So.
Absolutely, yeah, I'd agree.
There will be, as I mentioned at the start of this, there'll be a session on the compulsory unit, which of MO5. It's going to be limited numbers because one of the ways that Phil works best, and it's been alien for him today because he is so good at interaction and speaking with people. To be just on one side of the screen and not have that constant interaction probably takes away a bit from Phil. But the next session will be a bit more focused, a bit more sort of cohesive and collaborative, and it will be two-way. So the numbers for that MO5 workshop day will be limited, so probably around 14 or so.
Yes, I think that would be the maximum.
Yeah. So we'll advertise that in good time so that everyone can get in. But we'll try and give preference to those that are already registered for the we don't really want to have too many people on there that perhaps aren't ready for that exam. We want to help as many members that are close to taking that exam as possible. So yeah, there'll be some communication on that in the coming weeks. Please fill in that feedback form that I mentioned. And finally, a big thanks to Phil for his time.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody.
Right. Have a nice day, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Bye.